Orthodox Radio Crusade. Anarchism for the global city. Radical environmentalism for the concrete jungle. Esoteric explorations of the secret history of rebel culture. The Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Exiled from WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City. Now only on the World Wide Web. Be there.
Well, welcome aboard to the fourth internet episode of the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Hello, all you out there in cyberspace. And we are broadcasting once again from my apartment in NoHo, where we are joined tonight by Darryl Cherney and Mary Liz Thomson. Welcome aboard, guys.
Good to be here.
Hello.
Darryl, this is actually a big historic return to New York City for you. You're from New York City originally.
I grew up here. I was born on West 57th, and I moved to West 24th. I'm pretty much a Chelsea boy when it comes down to it.
And you used to be on the folk music circuit here back in, what would that be, the 70s?
Maybe the early 80s. I was member of the New York City Folk Musician Cooperative, and Jack Hardy, rest in peace, was one of its founders along with Rod McDonald. And yes, so I was over there on McDougal Street at the Speakeasy Cafe.
And your band was called the Chernettes, was it?
It was Darryl Cherney and the Chernettes.
Mm-hmm. Later to become Darryl Cherney and the Chernobyls?
It was an evolutionary process.
Yes. And now your evolutionary process has, taken you in the interim to the timber wars of Northern California in the 1980s into the 1990s, and into a head-on clash with the forces of right-wing terrorism and the FBI and
Wall Street.
And Wall Street, indeed. Right, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And you've made a movie about the whole thing, which is what brings you to New York.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made a movie called Bombed Judi Bari, and I moved to the Redwoods right from Manhattan. I went from Manhattan to Garberville, California, the capital of the Emerald Triangle. I sometimes say that I moved from the most paranoid city on the East Coast to the most paranoid city in the West, and got involved immediately in what became the Timber Wars, trying to stop a Wall Street corporate takeover of the Pacific Lumber Company, which was logging sustainably for 118 years. It was taken over by the Maxam Corporation, and later on we wound up taking on Louisiana Pacific. Another
Maxam Corporation being the vehicle of a Wall Street raider by the name of Charlie Hurwitz.
Absolutely correct.
Junk bond fueled hostile takeover, and in order to pay back the junk bond debts, he started aggressively liquidating the assets, that is, the trees.
That's right. They saw him as standing cash, basically, and he accelerated the clear cutting. It was also an insider trading case. It was Ivan Besky and Michael Milken that arranged that takeover deal. So you've got some, pretty high-level Wall Street criminals.
So this was the last round of Wall Street sleaze back in the 80s, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah, and there was a savings and loan that was looted in order to facilitate the takeover of Pacific Lumber. All Michael Milken's fingerprints were all over it.
They even looted the pension fund of the workers for PL,
And while we're on the subject, we also were taking on Louisiana Pacific, another New York Stock Exchange company, and they were also deceiving their shareholders. It was a different animal, but it was also shareholder fraud that was involved there, with them trying to convince the shareholders that they had many more trees than they actually had. They were secretly planning on liquidating and actually moving to Siberia, and they were producing vastly inferior wood products that wound up having federal investigations. But in the meantime, all of this always traced back to Wall Street, always traced back to the illegal, immoral, underhanded dealings of the titans of industry. And that's what I stepped into when I got off the boat from Manhattan and into Garberville. Little tiny Garberville.
Metaphorical boat.
The metaphorical boat, yes. It was actually a van named Ralph, by the way. Mm-hmm. Hi, Ralph. Anyway, so it was during that campaign to save the Redwoods that I met Judi Bari, who was a union organizer on the East Coast with the United States Post Office Workers, as well as the Retail Clerks Union. And she and I got together, both romantically and more importantly, politically, and we went on a rampage of protests, pretty much nonstop, that led up to something called Redwood Summer. And Redwood Summer 1990 would look very familiar to Occupy Wall Street people, because there was a lot of tents and a lot of occupations and a lot of protests, daily protests, a lot of arrests, but in the middle of it all,
modeled after Mississippi Summer.
That's right. The Civil Rights Movement style protest.
Now, what year was that?
It was the early 60s right through 64, and it was actually called Freedom Summer.
Freedom Summer, yeah.
And the people who came there were the Freedom Riders. Yeah. And yes, we modeled it to honor the people who had defended civil rights and fought for civil rights. They weren't even defending them because there weren't any to defend back then, but they were trying to institute them. And one of the interesting things about, there was violence done back then, and the FBI was involved in trying to disrupt the activists back in the early 60s. And the whole idea behind Freedom Summer, which we translated into Redwood Summer, was as long as things are happening behind the curtain of your little community, whether it's Mississippi that nobody in New York knew anything about, or Alabama, or Louisiana, etc., nobody would know what was happening. Nothing's going to get done. But when you invite everybody from around the country, particularly college students, to come down, you wind up getting some national media attention.
We're going to take a brief break while I answer the telephone. Hello.
So, with Redwood Summer, there came an enormous amount of death threats, which pretty much seemed to be coming from the timber industry, but some of which also seemed to be coming from the FBI. And the reason I say that is because the FBI was involved in death threats and disinformation and trying to foment political infighting throughout the 1960s and 70s, and right through the 1980s with us. And
fake press releases, just all kinds of distractions.
It was called COINTELPRO.
That's right, counterintelligence program. And on May 24th of 1990, while Judy and I were on a college tour where we were playing guitar and the fiddle because we were both musicians, and while we were giving speeches and showing slides, and why you should come to the Redwoods for Redwood Summer 1990, a bomb went off in Judi Bari's car, almost killing her.
In Oakland.
In Oakland, California, on Park MacArthur, right in front of Oakland High School. It was a pipe bomb with a motion device, which meant it would only go off if a car was being driven. That car had to be moving for the bomb to go off. And the FBI showed up within moments. Our eventual lawsuit against them said they showed up as if they were standing around the corner holding their ears. Right? They showed up that quickly, within just minutes, and had us arrested by the Oakland police and charged, not actually charged, but accused of carrying a bomb that had accidentally gone off.
Okay, well, if you were arrested, there must have been charges.
Well, there were charges of transportation of explosives, but what's a common misnomer to society is being arrested is something the cops do. Being charged is something the DA does.
Right.
And so
but there has to be a charge for you to be arrested.
We were arrested for transportation of explosive devices. Mm-hmm. Yes. 4 different counts. Mm-hmm. And held on $100,000 bail, which the community managed to dig up and get me out. Judy was in the ICU at the hospital, so she wasn't really going anywhere. And we were never charged by the DA.
All right, so I should just make clear that Judy was very, very severely hurt.
Yes, the pipe
bomb blew it right under her seat, and so she had breaks in her coccyx bone, her whole. She wasn't sure she would ever walk again. At that time, they told her she might not.
It was questionable whether she would even live.
Yeah.
She had intestinal damage, nerve damage to her right leg, a fractured pelvis, a dislocated coccyx and sacrum. I managed to escape the bombing with just some fractured eardrums and some minor burns and a scratched cornea. Really nothing compared to... I walked out of that car, and believe it or not, I was planning on showing up to UC Santa Cruz, where we were on our way to do a presentation that night. The old saying is the show must go on. And I figured, okay, I'm going to go down to UC Santa Cruz and sing and tell people what had just happened to us. But instead...
you were arrested.
Well, the FBI walked into the ER, asked me my name, asked me who could have done this. I gave them a laundry list of timber industry people who were sending out disinformation and who were threatening us, and they just waved their hand. Special Agent Phil Sena, as a matter of fact, waved his hand, and he said, he gave me his business card, by the way, and he said, look, we can tell if this is your bomb, so why don't you just confess, make it easy on all of us, and get it over with. And it was then that I realized, at that moment, that we had just joined the ranks of Leonard Peltier and Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt and all the other, activists who we had looked up to, really put on a pedestal as models of resistance. And all of a sudden, we're all in the same boat that those guys were in. And so not only were we bombed at the cusp of one of the greatest organizing campaigns, I believe, in American history, but we were just bombed and arrested. And like a lot of campaigns before us, instead of the question about whether we were there to save the Redwoods, it was, are we terrorists or not? And that became the question, which is, that was the whole idea.
Yeah, that's what they wanted to shift that focus of attention, And then it became about the bomb being, it was just so much complete lie immediately where the bomb was in the car. And they were saying, oh, if it was out in the open, then that meant they must have known it was there. And so they tried to say it was in the back seat. They should have been able to see it. The back seat was completely intact. I mean, just your first look at the car, the front seat is blown to smithereens. The back area where they're saying it was, it's like completely intact, But they were trying to, they just went ahead and said, blue is white and that's red.
Right, and they also said that they could tell it was our bomb because the bomb had nails attached to it, duct tape attached to it for shrapnel effect, and the nails strapped to the bomb were identical to nails that Judi was carrying in the back of her car. And one thing to remember about Judi Bari is that she was a professional carpenter. She was a foreman, and that's what she called herself, for California yurts. She built yurts for a living, and she was a master construction worker, and led an all-male crew. And so the nails in the back of her car were roofing nails, and the nails that strapped to the bomb were finishing nails. And saying that they were identical would be like saying a Rolls Royce and a Volkswagen are identical because they're both cars, And they were, roofing nails are short.
Completely different.
Yeah, I mean, roofing nails are short and fat with giant round heads, and finishing nails are long and thin with no head at all. I mean, they are not the same, even close. So they were lying, and they were lying fast and furiously. And then when they seized the bomb car, they didn't bother to cover it with a tarp, and it was raining. They didn't take any fingerprints, whatever fingerprints they were able to get off of anything later on. They didn't bother to even compare to our fingerprints. They did no investigation at all of the bombing. None. Zero. It wasn't a bad investigation. It was no investigation. But it was a series of lies that got put out to the media. And so we sued them in federal court.
Well, you're getting a little bit ahead of yourself.
I am.
Mm-hmm. Redwood Summer continued in spite of this.
Redwood Summer continued. Thousands of people came to the Redwoods. I participated in Redwood Summer. Judi Bari even made an appearance 3 months later.
I participated. Yeah, I was there.
Mary Liz filmed Judi Bari in her hospital bed. The first video interview done with her about 3 weeks after the bombing. It was a remarkable interview. She basically, Judi was not a big fan of the media, and the way the media handled the bombing was to run a lot of the police lies. And so Judi was shy of people videoing her, but she allowed Mary Liz, along with Mary Liz's video partner Tim Pearson, to come in and video Judi in her hospital bed. So that was really, in a way, it was the beginning of Mary Liz's first documentary called Redwood Summer, where the 90s begin. But later on, we've used a lot of Mary Liz's footage for the movie that we're going to be talking about tonight.
Mary Liz, what was your background professionally up to this point?
I was an independent activist filmmaker, and Darryl and Judi had come and, through some people I knew in the IWW, had come to play in San Francisco, and they came down a lot to let people in the Bay Area know what was going on with the Redwoods. So they actually came to a house. I lived in a big collective house in San Francisco, and played music, and so I met them, I believe it was at the beginning, and it was at the end of '89 or the beginning of 1990, somewhere around in there, and so I knew them when the bomb went off, and I had footage of them and of Judi before she was injured. And it was chilling that day. I'll never forget it. When I heard about what happened, it was just this immediate, oh my God, they tried to kill him. I mean, I just knew immediately, someone tried to kill them. And my partner and I went out right away. I worked at a professional place, so we were able to get Betacam cameras, and we went out to the Oakland jail and just started filming. And then we went to the Seeds of Peace house where the activists were helping with Redwood Summer, and we just started doing that, and then we ended up making a short documentary that was used to help promote Redwood Summer and taken on the roadshow tour. And then we kept filming, and a lot of the other footage of the summer I had never done another documentary with, and we ended up incorporating it into this one. I interviewed Judy later, a month later, when she was in the next stage of rehab, and a lot of other stuff.
So you were taken to Oakland City Jail?
I was taken from the emergency room to Oakland City Jail. And so right out of a bomb car, and actually into an interrogation cell first, where they questioned me. Well, first of all, they left me there for 7 hours. And
there was a vigil outside. We were all outside, and we knew he was in there.
It was more than a vigil outside. There was an occupation of the interior of the Oakland Police Department. There's about 75 people inside the Oakland Police Department singing, chanting.
And that's true.
Yes, it was actually quite beautiful because they have very nice high ceilings with great acoustics.
So how long were you held?
I was held for 5 days until I was bailed out. And then the judge, and then the DA wouldn't press charges. He looked at the evidence and said, well, there is no evidence. And, the DA wasn't in the loop, but he didn't need to be in the loop because the smear had already been accomplished.
Right. So the charges against you were dropped.
Yeah.
That would be correct.
Yeah.
But they did it in a way that was like, well, it's not because we don't suspect them. We just, they're still suspects. So they did it in a way that didn't clear them. Mm-hmm. There were no charges, but then they kept trying to.
And no other charges were ever brought.
Right.
No. Whoever did it remains at large.
That's absolutely, right. Because there was no investigation of the bombing, and even to this day, 21 years later, I continue my own investigation of the bombing, and I'm hoping that the movie Who Bombed Judi Bari, that we're actually here to talk about today, will reinvigorate an investigation of the bombing.
All right. Before we get to the film and suspects and intrigue, why don't you briefly tell us what happened with Redwood Summer and what happened with Pacific Lumber and
the Timber Wars.
The Timber Wars, yeah.
Redwood issues. Yeah.
Well, Redwood Summer went on for 3 months. It was an amazing series of events, daily demonstrations, total occupation of the Redwoods, base camps set up. The footage that was taken that people will see in our movie will give an idea of both the intensity, the numbers, and the spirit of which that the protests carried with them.
These are people running in front of bulldozers, big crowds trying to block actual logging, actions in the moment they're happening. I mean, it's really incredible courage, actually. I mean, there's some amazing things that people did at that time. And,
of course, sitting in trees, the Earth First standard, tried and true, hallmark action, the tree sit. We pretty much, we did invent it, and we continue to use it. But the other thing that happened that we haven't spoken about was that there was a ballot initiative called Forest Forever, Proposition 130. And the backdrop for Redwood Summer was that there was a political campaign that would have reformed timber practices, would have banned clear cutting, would have increased the protection zone around watercourses like streams and rivers, would have protected wildlife. And that ballot initiative in November of 90, after the bombing, lost by 1 percentage point. And the industry actually put my name in the argument on the ballot against voting for Forest Forever, Proposition 130.
That it would associate it with some kind of violence that people, because so many people had just these brief impressions from the news. Oh, those were those kids that were carrying that bomb. That's all they heard.
Yes. And so in some ways the end result of this all was tragic, that Forest Forever lost. Now it did have a $1.3 billion bond that would have purchased old-growth redwoods, which, in the scheme of things today doesn't seem like very much money, but back then it was a lot of money. And so the industry also hammered on the cost of Forest Forever, but ultimately it was the bombing that they used as one of the vehicles to vote against it. And we were 1 percentage point away.
But a few years after that, a deal was worked out where the Headwaters Grove, which was the most critical ancient grove on Pacific Lumber land, in fact was saved and is now...
That was a long campaign. Yeah, it took a while. And even with Redwood Summer, and there's one thing Judy says in the movie, It did. They were able to stop timber harvest plans, and they couldn't have done that, especially for headwaters where the biggest groves left of any of the real old 2,000-year-old trees and stuff are. And without redwood summer, that never would have happened. That had never happened before. So without that kind of pressure, all of a sudden they were able to say, wait a minute, maybe we're not going to approve all that. You know?
And how actually did that come to pass? I mean, Charlie Hurwitz, this corporate raider guy, was sort of bought off, and that piece of land was transferred to the Bureau of Land Management?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
A Department of Interior, and so Headwaters Forest did receive federal protection, and but one of the other, we also, in the process of all this, we're saving other groves as well. There was a old-growth Douglas fir grove called the Cotto Wilderness, which was saved, 18,000 acres. And there was even Julia Butterfly's 3-acre tree sit that we were involved in saving. I was very involved in that.
Now, that's also Pacific Lumberland?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think one of the...
All right, and that was saved, how was that saved?
It was actually saved by acquisition. It was bought for $50,000.
By the state of California? Or
by individual donors.
All right, so now it belongs to whom?
It's actually was given a conservation easement. So while it's technically owned by Pacific Lumber, nobody can go in there and log it.
Gotcha.
So, and in the process of all that, there was a death. David Gypsy Chain got killed by falling redwood. Some say deliberately, because the logger who hit him with that tree, put a redwood on his head, and split his brains open across the forest floor. Told him he was going to do exactly that right before he did it.
Now, what year was that?
On video. That was in 1998. Yeah. So it's been a very dramatic series of events.
And it was a buildup of a lot of also direct civil disobedience. Some of the largest rallies for forest, how many people were arrested, every year would get larger and larger. 2,000. What was the biggest one?
Well, the biggest arrest was 1,033. Were arrested in one civil disobedience action. And I believe, I know that it's the largest civil disobedience in forest history, but I would challenge anybody here to tell me of any civil disobedience in the history of the United States in which 1,033 people were arrested at a single time.
Maybe just the Keystone Pipeline one. I think they had over 1,000 recently, and they were saying it was
arrested at one
biggest,
time?
Yep.
At the same day?
Well,
over a period of days.
I'm talking about one day, one action.
Yeah. And when was this, Darryl?
That action was in 1996. Senator Dianne Feinstein was paying attention, and actually at the end of those arrests, she announced that there was going to be a deal to save headwaters. And when David Gypsy Chain got killed by the falling redwood 2 years later, still no deal for the redwoods, by the way, 2 years later.
I mean, these things get dragged out.
The wheels of justice are square. And but when David Gypsy Chain got killed, we forced the political hand to increase the volume of acres of old growth that would be saved. So it actually brought it up to another few thousand. And the reason I want to make that point is that I wanted Gypsy's mother as well as the public to know that Gypsy didn't die in vain. We used his martyrdom to save more trees, which was what he was fighting for.
Well, in an odd way as well, even though it affected the law that didn't pass in the fall, but for Redwood Summer, when they do these violent things, it backfires on them. It brought more people to Redwood Summer. I mean, people heard about the bombing. The activists that are willing to dig under the surface and got what was really going on, and could see that, it just got way more attention than it would have without it, in a way, probably.
There's a natural rebellious spirit inside of most humans, and different things trigger it. There's a lot of passivity, there's a lot of apathy, but there's also a lot of rebellion, and so it definitely brought a lot of people, but I think it also brought some different people who might not have ordinarily come to Redwood Summer. So I think
it certainly scared some people away, maybe too. Maybe it did both. But
one of the things that I think is really important to know about our movie, Who Bombed Judi Bari, playing at the Brecht Forum this Tuesday, the 15th, is that, in New York City, is that there's a lot of victories in our movie. That we save Cotto, headwaters, we get people fired from their jobs, we beat the FBI and the Oakland police. So it's not just about tragedy, it's about victory, it's about sustainability, it's about educating. And one of the things that Judy and I were very conscious of back in '90 was that we were going to do Redwood Summer in order to teach people how to do these things around the rest of the United States and the world. So we weren't asking people, per se, to save the redwoods. We were asking people to defend their promised land, to defend their own home turf. And so when we see Occupy Wall Street, the New York City people doing that right here at the doors of the New York Stock Exchange, that is exactly what we had in mind way back then. And how much of an influence we were, indirectly or directly, I can't tell you. But what I do know is that that was our message. And Judi Bari says it in her great speech, which is both in the movie and also recorded on the CD that I made, the spoken word CD for Alternative Tentacles Records. She says, you're going to take this message home wherever you live, because it's all one issue. The same system that rewards Charles Hurwitz while it takes welfare checks away from needy mothers. It's the same system.
All right, I'm going to ask 2 more questions before we take a brief musical break. One is, who did it, in your estimation?
I believe, and I have hard evidence that you can hold in your hand and see on a piece of paper, that it was Louisiana Pacific Corporation in conjunction with the FBI. And, for example...
And some of their own informants, or, maybe a collection a little more than that.
No question that it was a conspiracy, and we can prove that it was a conspiracy. I mean, we have DNA evidence that shows that there are more than one person involved. Multiple DNA samples from death threats, and also from, there was a letter that took credit for the bombing. But before I get to that letter, which had DNA on it that we tested, I can tell you that 30 days before Judi Bari and I were bombed, Louisiana Pacific, one of the other companies we were fighting, another New York Stock Exchange company, was hosting the FBI teaching a course called Bomb School at College of the Redwoods. They have a police academy there, and so they were blowing up cars with pipe bombs on a Louisiana Pacific clear-cut in a class taught by FBI terrorism chief Frank Doyle, Special Agent Frank Doyle, on an LP clear-cut. And then 2 weeks after bomb school took place, a first bomb went off at a Louisiana Pacific sawmill with a sign that was left taking credit saying, LP screws mill workers. So it was made to appear like it was somebody who sympathized with sawmill workers that did the bombing. And then 2 weeks...
But it didn't go off really it didn't really go off. It kind of just sort of exploded badly or something. So it was either made not to really cause any damage, but to look like a bomb or something. Like it didn't cause any damage.
So that bomb is actually in pretty good shape. In other words, that bomb is held by the FBI, which is something that we're trying to actually get a hold of right now. And all you need to do to make a bomb not go off properly, a pipe bomb that is, I know way more than I ever planned on knowing, is a piece of pipe, you stuff it with explosives and you screw on end caps. But if you unscrew one of the end caps just so, it'll blow out the end cap and not explode the shrapnel.
Right.
And so the reason that this is important is you got LP hosting the FBI bomb school. Then 2 weeks later, a bomb goes off at an LP sawmill. And then 2 weeks after that, the same bomber who bombed the LP sawmill bombed Judi Bari's car.
They can tell that it was made by the same person.
But it wasn't just that we can tell, but a letter writer takes credit for it, saying he did both bombings and describes both bombings accurately. The color of the wires, the way they were turned, the brand of the pocket watch, the brand of the battery, the size of the pipe, the type of the explosive, even the oil fuel mixture in a gasoline can that was left at the Louisiana Pacific mill to set the place on fire. And by the way, who leaves a paper note next to a firebomb? Okay, just to make a point, all right? Nevertheless...
How did all this come to light about the bomb school?
Well,
good question.
Through the lawsuit that we filed a year later, through discovery, we would say, we'd ask all these police officers and FBI agents, who did you know? Where did you meet them?
All right.
And at some
we're getting ahead of ourselves.
We are.
Second question, and then we'll talk briefly about the lawsuit.
But you asked me who bombed us.
Right, yes.
And so we have since that time done a lot of DNA testing, and we have a police informant letter with the identical DNA as a death threat. And if anybody knows anything about the history of the FBI, you'll know that they used their informants as assassins. Goes back to the Civil Rights Movement. But they basically say to the informant, who's usually a criminal, is, we'll let you off the hook for all the murders you've done in the past if you'll just go ahead and kill these other guys.
Do this one for us.
Do this one for us. And then we'll forgive all the other ones. It's quite common, very well documented. I mean, the Whitey Bulger case up in Boston is a great example of that, but let's not get too far afield. And so, and he was just arrested.
Yes.
Yes. So more to the point, so we do have a number of police informants that we do suspect, and I'm not going to give their names on the show right now. I don't want to reveal all of our secrets except to say that we have the names. But without the powers of the police, you can't do search warrants, you can't get fingerprints, you can't do DNA testing, you can't question people. Some of the people we want to question are downright dangerous.
Okay, so
this is the problem. The activists had to do all this research themselves. The police never investigated anything. They never looked for who. This is a bomb goes off in the United States, and they don't really bother to check where. The mill one, they never tested any of it. They never even tested fingerprints or DNA or anything.
All bombings in the United States are referred to the FBI, except for the one that went off at the Cloverdale Mill, who was the same guy who bombed Judy's car. That was never sent to the FBI.
All right, so ultimately, you sued the FBI.
And the Oakland Police.
And won.
We won.
You got a settlement.
No, we got an award.
An award. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always
Forgive me, yes.
Yes, because most lawsuits don't go to trial. Most criminal cases don't get to trial. They settle out of court.
Right.
I always like to make the point that we went in front of a jury, and a jury unanimously awarded us $4.4 million. Absolutely. That was quite a story.
All right, so you sued them for what?
We sued them for violations of the United States Constitution, primarily for the First Amendment, freedom of speech, seeing that they knew we were innocent, and yet they accused us of being guilty to shut us up, to smear
their voices.
Precisely. And so that is a violation of the First Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment is illegal search and seizure and false arrest. But the jury award that we ultimately got was 80% of the money was for violations of freedom of speech. We really want to make that point clear, that the jury held that the most sacred of all.
What year was that?
The 12 years after we were bombed, and 5 years after Judi Bari died.
My final question, what happened to Judy?
Judy lived through the bombing. She lived the next 7 years in pain, right through 1997, or until 1997. And she was in horrible pain, nerve damage. She basically never slept more than 2 hours a night, sometimes never slept. She raised 2 girls by herself, her daughters. And then in late 1996, she was diagnosed with breast cancer that had metastasized to her liver. I imagine all the stress of living in that much pain just tore down her immune system. And 4 months after being diagnosed, she went down like a rocket ship and died on March 2nd, 1997. But not...
Not before giving her deposition, for her lawyers who were planning the trial knew that they needed it and they needed to get it done before she died, and she was realizing she wasn't going to be there for the trial, so they better get it on tape. And that's what we ended up using for kind of the structural basis of our documentary. So she really gets to tell her whole story from the point of view of being asked by her lawyer in a deposition. So we used the deposition for our documentary.
The original name of the movie was The Deposition of Judi Bari, which movies have working titles, and we switched that to Who Bombed Judi Bari. But this deposition that she gave isn't just on tape, it's on videotape. And so we have Judi Bari giving her deathbed deposition.
She died 1 month later.
Wow. Should we take a brief musical break?
Sure.
The unofficial word is the 2 environmentalists injured when a bomb went off in their car just before noon are suspects and not just victims. The unconfirmed report says Judi Bari and Darryl Cherney will be charged with possession and transportation of explosives.
I think we need sustained yield so that our children can have wood to build out of. We're not saying no logging.
What is the basic event out of which the case arose?
I was bombed and nearly killed in a car bomb assassination attempt. There was a very huge explosion, and I felt it rip through me.
Police say their evidence is compelling, but they would not say what it is.
Of course, the nails didn't match either. They went into my house and pulled nails out of the window trim. This is not your normal investigation where they're trying to find out who did something. They were just trying to frame me.
Terrorists is all they are. They go blowing up stuff. They caught him down in Frisco with the bomb.
Our struggle to save these forests has been a trail of tears and broken trees. We've put, quote unquote, the best forestry laws in the country on the books. We've done everything we can to enforce them, and they still take every tree in the forest.
What was it you hoped to achieve by pursuing the lawsuit?
Justice. Justice and vindication.
It was an emotional day in the courtroom today in the case of Earth First activists Judi Bari and Darryl Cherney versus the FBI and Oakland police.
People can see when activists are attacked for their activism by the government, by the police.
What the FBI has been doing instead of fighting terrorism is looking at activists and tampering with activists' protected activities, and that's got to stop.
The question I get asked a lot is, do you think the FBI was involved in the bombing somehow? And I would say they were involved in the bombing right up to the present moment by hiding the identity of the bomber. They're running cover for the bomber, and they're doing it right to this moment.
All right, so I'm going to play show and tell a little bit. People can see I like books. I have a certain fondness for books. This is Timber Wars by Judi Bari, which pretty much tells the whole story that we've been talking about, right?
It does.
Yeah. This is her memoir of the Redwood campaigns.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a series of articles that she wrote, and from it you'll get her humor as well as her brilliant analysis of the issues. I mean, Judi she called herself a commie with a small c. Her heroes, interestingly, were Chairman Mao, Fidel Castro, and Jimmy Hoffa.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it's
well,
fun.
I hope that she was at least somewhat critical of these figures.
Oh, of course she was.
I mean, that's with humor.
Yes, it was always with humor. And keeping in mind that she was.
I thought she was more of a sort of a wobbly type than a.
She was.
Than a Maoist.
No, absolutely correct. But she was definitely came from a leftist background. She was a red diaper baby. Her parents helped hide the Rosenbergs. I mean, Judi came from the.
So she grew up. Was it Delaware or
Baltimore?
Baltimore, yeah.
Yes, and she was positively brilliant. And one of the things I think that people will learn about in our movie, Who Bombed Judi Bari, is that Judi was funny. This isn't just a movie about a woman being bombed and maimed and feel sorry for her and the redwoods get cut. This is, our movie, Who Bombed Judi Bari, is supposed to be inspirational. It's supposed to enliven you and inspire you and send you into the streets or the woods. It's not supposed to depress you and make you just shake your head and wonder, what can I do? It's supposed to let you know what you can do.
And it's not a talking movie. It's not like a lot of people just interviews and stuff. We take you through her story. There's so much footage, mine and around 20 other independent videographers. We went around and collected footage that would follow them around through all of these actions and movements. So there was a wide variety of footage that covered years, spanning all the way up till today. And so we had an amazing amount to choose from, but what it ended up making, we were able to do with our movie, is it plays like a drama. You are with them. You're with them when they're at Cotto, on their blockades and putting things in the road while the cops have to stop and get them out of the way every time. And it's a really humorous moment, some of the way they did their blockades and actions. And so you get to experience it. It's not that kind of educational, informational, this is sort of medicine movie. It's hopefully more on an emotional level. You see what it felt like, what they went through, how smart she was, how funny she was.
Well, there was no new footage taken for this movie except for some high-def digital footage of the redwoods. No interviews were taken. This movie is essentially 100% archival.
So it's not people talking about what happened in the past. It's showing what they were, in a progression, the way it was.
We were all media sluts, and so we pretty much have all the television coverage of the bombing and all the television coverage of our actions, And so we use a lot of news footage because our movie is as much about the media as it's a coverage of what was going on as it is about the Redwoods. And so so the movie consists of a compilation of VHS, Super VHS. There's even some film in there.
High 8, Betacam, all the old formats.
Mini DV is as high tech as we go.
Or we should say you are respectively producer and director. Have I got that right?
Yes, Mary Liz Thomson is
I
the
also
director.
edited as well.
Yes.
Editor, director.
And I'm the producer, and I'm also music supervisor.
That's right.
And we should also say, for those of you who are going to be watching this in the next 48 hours, that we are going to be doing a screening.
A sneak preview?
A sneak preview screening. Sort of a focus group
discussion. It's in conjunction with Occupy Wall Street. We feel that Judi Bari, first of all, needs to come to Occupy Wall Street. We want to bring her there, and we'd like people at Occupy Wall Street to hear what Judi has to say.
So this is going to be a sneak preview focus group screening, particularly for Occupy Wall Street people, occupiers and their sympathizers and fellow travelers, happening under the auspices of the Libertarian Book Club Anarchist Forum. And it's going to be happening the night of Tuesday, the 15th of this month, November, at the Brecht Forum, which is on West Street between Bank and Bethune and on the farthest reaches of the West Village.
It's 451 West Street.
There you go.
Right next to the West Side Highway.
Yeah.
Actually, West Street is the West Side Highway. And so that's where we're going to be. And
so those of you who are watching this before that happens, please be there on the 15th. 7:30 sharp.
But you can come at 7, schmooze a little bit,
Yeah.
and then 7:30 we start the movie, and after that we can talk some more.
On Tuesday the 15th. Okay, the next book that I'm going to play Show and Tell with.
Show and Tell Pro.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Agents of Repression, the FBI's Secret Wars Against the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement by Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall. Now, Ward Churchill has said some really stupid and problematic things. I'd be the first one to emphasize that. But this is a very, very important book that he published way back in 1988, South End Press in Boston, which really fastidiously documents the COINTELPRO campaign of the FBI against the Black Panthers, the American Indian Movement, and also the Puerto Rican Independence Movement, and certain elements of the New Left as well. Which was a campaign of dirty tricks where they essentially tried to destroy these movements through encouraging factionalism and playing rivalries off against each other, and through assassination. And interestingly enough, some of the people who are mentioned in this book as having led this COINTELPRO campaign against the Black Panthers and the American Indian Movement back in the 1960s and early 1970s, their names show up once again in the whole Judi Bari saga 20 years later.
Absolutely, and the main name that we feature prominently in our movie is Richard W. Held, an architect of COINTELPRO, the man who personally set up Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, a Black Panther, wrongly convicted of a murder. He wasn't even, he was like 400 miles away from the murder that took place.
He spent so long in prison.
27 years in prison. By the way, the FBI, they had to let him out, and the FBI had to pay him $4 million for his 27 years in prison. Certainly not worth it. No, it's not enough. But my point is that they did have to pay him out, but there was no trial in that case. The jury didn't have to decide that one. But Richard Held has been a dirty trickster with the Puerto Rican Independence Movement, the American Indian Movement. He led the manhunt for Leonard Peltier following the incident at Oglala, the firefight that took place on Pine Ridge with the Lakota Sioux versus the FBI.
So his father was in the FBI, so was this.
Yes.
Generational thing. Yeah.
And so Held was the chief of the San Francisco FBI Bureau. He was a special agent in charge of the San Francisco Bureau, and he spoke publicly on television, which we feature in our movie, about our case. And he also wrote a letter to the San Francisco Examiner about our case as well. So Held was not just in charge of the Bureau.
Put his own name out there, man.
Yeah, he wanted to make sure we all knew they had the Richard Held seal of approval. And we did sue him as part of our case, but the judge sadly dismissed him from the case. But, and that's the way it goes.
High up or whatever, they dismiss the higher up ones.
Well, as our lawyer, Dennis Cunningham, liked to point out, Richard Held's boss and the judge's boss are the same, the Department of Justice.
This is true.
So there you go.
And where is he today? Retired?
Well, it's in our movie. He left the FBI right when we were uncovering the fact that they knowingly lied about the bomb. We were the first real hard evidence, other than the obviousness of the lies, was the photographs that the FBI had taken right after the bombing, in which the FBI was displaying that they knew we were innocent photographically through various, they knew that the bomb...
It's obvious by looking at the pictures, basically. And yet they released them to Darryl and Judy, and as Judy says in our movie, they must have been distracted with Waco or something, because it was at that time when that whole thing was happening, because they gave them these pictures which were just so outrageously obvious where the bomb was, because they kept... The reason why it was an issue was they were trying to say, if a bomb is inside a car, it's more like invisible, it's more likely that people knew it was there. If it was under your car, then maybe someone else put it there. But so that was their whole logic, and so they had to kind of keep going with that. And it was, it was hidden under her seat, which maybe their informant screwed up. Who knows? Or no, they had to injure you guys, put it somewhere where it would injure you guys, and it would all the photos completely show a huge hole in the bottom of the car, the metal, all right there, and back seat completely with fabric and everything intact, everything else blown to smithereens. I mean, it's just like. It's so obvious, it's unbelievable that they even were able to convince other officers on the scene to write down. There's one guy, which Judy explains in our movie, who gets there and says, I noticed the hole under the front seat. As soon as the FBI gets there, his written statements and testimony of that day start changing. And Frank Doyle arrived, and he told me the bomb was in the back seat.
Special Agent Frank Doyle, the head of the terrorism division, also known as Squad 13, in San Francisco. Yes, the incredible moving bomb. The bomb actually gradually goes to plain view in the backseat as the police reports progress.
Yeah,
and one of the most interesting facts is the original police report lists the bomb as a booby trap. And the word booby trap is later crossed out and then I believe replaced with the IED, an improvised explosive device. But the key thing about a booby trap, also known as a VO, which is victim operated, means that a booby trap can only go off if the victim interacts with it. And so it would be obvious that we were the victims if it was a booby trap. So they cross out the word booby trap. They did a lot of effort to...
All right, they crossed it out in what?
On a police report.
In a police report.
So as not to imply that, this motion device that was only going to go off if they were driving, and that she did go over a big, put on the brakes, and like anyone in their right mind, if they were, would drive around with that knowing it was there, right? That, it could go off on motion.
Well, there was the motion device, just so we're clear, was a ball bearing, and there was 4 wires, a positive and a negative, and all the ball bearing had to do was touch 2 wires. So the ball bearing sat in a cup, and when the car moved, the ball bearing would jiggle around. And as soon as it touched 2 wires, the circuit would be complete, and the bomb would go off. It was a metal ball bearing touching 2 metal wires. Car had to move in order for that to happen. So I forget where we were with all this, but that is the nature of the motion device.
All right, I have one more book, which I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. The Secret Wars of Judi Bari.
I just wanted to say one more thing, because while you were on the topic of that,
COINTELPRO,
the legacy of J. Edgar Hoover and this kind of COINTELPRO operation still exists in the Bay Area. And it really seems like the Oakland police are just following from the same playbook today. And
right, I wanted to get to that, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about the little hit piece?
Well, yes, this was, I guess, a part of the smear campaign, you would argue, right? The Secret Wars of Judi Bari by Kate Coleman.
Yes. It was put out by a right-wing publisher who also publishes David Horowitz. This publisher seems to specialize in finding people who claim to be leftists who converted to the right wing because we were all, we're all bad people. And
Encounter Books in San Francisco.
Yes, they've done hit pieces on Hillary Clinton, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time that this book came out, Susan Faludi, the feminist writer, was supposed to have already published her book on the bombing case, a book which she spent 5 years working on, which never came out.
Indeed.
For Times Publishing.
Why did it never come out?
Well, I've called Susan repeatedly on that, and she won't give me a straight answer.
Huh. You're prepared to say this on record?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Well, she started doing another book after 9/11 about the 9/11 stuff, and I think it's such an overwhelming story. It's such a big story that spans a lot of time, and it's such a, I don't know. I think, who knows, she might still be working it out, and it's a complex story. It is.
Susan's book that she started writing, which she said was the reason she didn't finish the Judi book, was how 9/11 was fostered more masculinism, more male chauvinism in America because it put the male hero on a pedestal. That was the theory of her 9/11 book, and that's what she did instead of finishing her Judi Bari book. It doesn't seem right that you would spend 5 years. She came to every single day of the trial.
I don't know if you're insinuating insinuations or...
I'm not insinuating anything,
but
what I can simply tell you is that Susan never finished her book.
Well, Susan, if you're watching this, maybe you'll shoot us an email and let us know what's going on with the book. Maybe you're going to finish it one day. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be.
But in the meantime, while that book was supposed to come out, the right wing put out a hit piece called The Secret Wars of Judi Bari, and by Kate Coleman. And it's just, we actually... we did it collectively, but it was mostly put out by Judy's ex-husband, put out a small booklet of how many lies are in this book. Just outright fabrications that were concocted pretty much out of thin air. And so the book is essentially a work of fiction on Judi Bari that seeks to diminish her political role and put forth some kind of theory that Judi was bombed for personal reasons rather than political reasons, to take away her political strengths and her notoriety in exchange for this was some kind of,
personal vendetta.
Personal vendetta for non-political reasons. Yes, exactly.
Sounds specious.
Yeah, it is. Well, what kind of personal vendetta has an army of FBI agents waiting to blame you for bombing yourself?
Sounds speculative at best.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds COINTELPRO most likely.
Right, which brings me to a final point. Mary Liz just anticipated what I was going to say. Is that there was this sense that COINTELPRO, which Ward Churchill writes about in his book Agents of Repression. Well, that was all a long time ago. It was all back in the 1960s and the 1970s. And after the church hearings and so on, it was all sort of cleaned up.
It was supposed to be outlawed, and after that point, that's right.
And yet, apparently, such tactics lived on at least into the 80s and 90s, as the Judi Bari case demonstrates. And here we are today, where after what happened in Oakland over the course of the past 2 weeks, there is once again speculation about FBI provocateurs or government provocateurs at work to try to delegitimize what is beginning to smell more and more like a burgeoning revolutionary movement in this country.
Yes. And that's the job of the FBI. The FBI was created around 1915, 1916, specifically to destroy the industrial labor movement, particularly the Wobblies, and the organizing of women, of people of color, of all the industrial workers who weren't really being represented by the labor unions at that time, at least not en masse. And the FBI was created to destroy the organizing of working people in this country. And, culminating in the Palmer raids of 1920, in which 20,000 IWW members, Wobblies, were rounded up over a 2-3 night period, crushing the most prominent radical labor movement this country has ever known. And so one could say that the FBI was created as America's secret police. It was created to take on the left. It was not created as a crime-fighting organization. It was not created to catch kidnappers or go after the mafia. In fact, in the 60 years or so that J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI, he never once used the word mafia because
and he never went after them.
He never went after them because he had his own skeletons in his closet that they were holding over him. But he was a political police chief who went after various movements who wanted to make this world a better place. And that's, so in a sense, that is the reason the FBI is here. I mean, why don't you go ahead and take a look at FBI history of crimes that they've solved, and it's a pretty paltry list. They can barely catch a kidnapper. They can barely catch a bank robber. The guys, I mean, where the FBI's got tens of thousands of agents. They get billions of dollars that they're spending. Read the papers. What do they actually do? What crimes are they solving? They're a political police force.
Well, we would like to believe less so today than in the bad old days of J. Edgar Hoover.
We'd like to.
I wouldn't like to. I think the FBI needs to be disbanded because it's a bad seed. You know, it's a bad government agency that cannot be reformed because it's been imprinted with the sleaze and corruption that J. Edgar Hoover infused into it early on.
So the movie is going to be, you're going to officially unveil it at the Cannes Festival next year in France? Or?
Well, it would be very nice if we were at Sundance.
We don't know when our first official unveiling will be. We're waiting to hear about Sundance, which would be great if we
we'll know
very soon about that.
In a week.
And there's a few other high-profile festivals, if we don't get into that we would try to get into South by Southwest and Cannes. So those are,
There's Seattle Film Festival, there's Tribeca here in New York, there's quite a number of film festivals that we can enter, but the purpose of a film festival is simply to increase your visibility so you can get a distribution agreement. And that's really what it's about, is you want your movie to be seen. And so hopefully you can be picked up by a production company or a studio that has a distribution vehicle so you can go international, national. We want to be in theaters. We don't just, we're not, of course we're interested in printing DVDs and bringing this into the homes of people, but first and foremost, I mean, this is a work of art. And Mary Liz in particular, but both of us, put a lot of artistry into this movie. This is not just a telling story of a tragic tale of heroism. This is, there's about 35 musicians who have contributed to this.
A lot of the local music of the times that speaks to the stories of what was going on, and just local flavor. We used a lot of music, throughout it in that way.
Including Judy's music.
Judy's music,
she played the fiddle.
She sings, and she sings about the FBI stealing her fiddle.
Right, the FBI confiscated her fiddle.
Yes. And so there's even a little scene in front of the San Francisco Federal Building where people are chanting, "Free the fiddle."
Right.
So there's humor. That's the thing. You see what this meant to people. The movie, I think it will really stand out, and we're getting that feedback from a lot of people that it's not your typical documentary. It could, kind of be a breakout type of movie, and I think it's satisfying to watch. It's satisfying to get to know Darryl and Judy, especially since she's gone now, and the legacy of what she did, and the way she talks and the way she looked at the world is very powerful. And I think it's an inspiration for us now, and just given what's going on, but for the next generation, younger kids. We had a 25-year-old assistant working with us for a little while, and she said herself and her friends were just so inspired to know about this story because they just they're so searching for somebody who's an example that they can kind of a role model, and there's not that many, they're looking for that, and it reminded me how important that is.
So the official release will be sometime over the course of the next year.
Over the next few months.
Next few months.
It's a little out of our hands. I mean, we're looking for a distributor that would do that official release. So.
But meanwhile, there's going to be the
sneak preview and focus group showing at the Brecht Forum, 451 West Street, this coming Tuesday, November 15th. The doors open at 7, movie at 7:30, and
under the auspices of the New York City Anarchist Forum.
Absolutely.
You can also, if you can't make it to that screening, you can check us out on our website, Who Bombed Judi Bari, and there's
WhoBombedJudiBari.com. And Judi Bari,
Facebook page as well. And what would help us a lot is if people do write comments or go to our Facebook page. I mean, it just helps to see that you have an audience interest. all that kind of stuff does help. So.
And for the remainder of your time here in New York, I guess you're going to be spending a lot of time down at Zuccotti Park with the occupation.
It's why we're here. I mean, we are here to participate in Occupy Wall Street, to be part of history, to contribute to history, to bring Judi Bari to this part of history. And you were kind enough to sponsor our movie at the Brecht Forum as
an honor and a privilege.
Yes, no, thank you. In conjunction with our bringing Judi Bari to Occupy Wall Street.
So, with that, hope to see all of you either down at Occupy Wall Street or at the Anarchist Forum on Tuesday night, or both. Thank you for joining us, Darryl Cherney and Mary Liz Thomson.
And bombedjudibari.com, and that's Judibari. The eyes have it.
Salam alaikum.